All right. Okay. So Ashley, thanks so much for joining us. And just so you guys know, we have Ashley Trout here with Brook and Bull, a winery up in Walla Walla, Washington, one of my favorite U.S. wine regions. So thanks so much for taking the time and coming to talk to us.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So I have a lot of questions for you. I'm super excited to actually get to meet you in person. Well, kind of in person. Um, but I was at your winery September of 2019, and I got to come in and do a lot of tastings. You weren't there, but I got to sip through a lot of your wines, and I liked everything, but I loved your Petit Verdot. So it's like my new favorite varietal. And I was like, oh, I want this. So I'm super excited to meet you and get to talk to you about how you got into winemaking and some of the things that you see, just coming at it from a different perspective as a woman in the wine industry, which is typically a male dominated industry.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I would just love to, hear your story and your journey into getting into wine.
Yeah. For me, it was right place, right time over and over again. So I'm from Washington, D.C. and smatterings of LA, and everybody in my family is on the East Coast. And so I kind of knew the East Coast. I kind of knew small town. I kind of knew big cities, and I wanted to use college as an excuse to go to a small town, and I wanted to see the Wild West. So none of that had anything to do with wine. And I got out to Walla Walla to go to a college here called Whitman College. And while I was here, I thought, well, I'm only going to be here for 4 years, and then I'm going to graduate and go to a city and get a real job. So whatever's going on here, I'll do it, right? When in Rome. And I saw an opportunity to work at a winery, to do the nighttime punch downs. It's Reininger Winery, and the job was to go out and mix up the fermentation bins late at night. And that way you relieve the main crew that's been working all day. They can go take a shower and eat dinner and pass out. And you get some peon to show up at like 11 o'clock at night and blast some music and have a workout for all intents and purposes.
Yeah.
And that was great. It was great. It was the opposite of everything I was going through, because I was surrounded by people and doing all academic stuff. So it was fun to get away and do that. That was 99, September of 99.
What was your major at Whitman? Like, what did you think you were going to be?
I double majored in anthropology and rhetoric.
Oh, okay.
So there's that. And I use it to make wine. So yeah, and I loved it. I mean, I immediately loved, I was young, I was underage. So it really wasn't about my long history of drinking wine. It was more that I love the seasonality of it. I think there's something very human to changing what you do from season to season, something very fulfilling. And so you have this huge adrenaline rush during harvest, and then you kind of pass out in December and January and February, and then you start sort of getting into bottling season and blending, and then in the spring you're really starting to pay attention to vineyards. Summer, lots of vineyard stuff, and then in the fall, all over again. And I love that. I love that it's very physical. I love that you're tapping into a sense of intelligence that we don't normally think of as intelligence, which is like your body and your capabilities. Like, it's got to come from within in a visceral, tactile way. It has to do with what you're smelling and what you're tasting, and even what you're seeing as far as color, and even what you're hearing when you're listening to a malolactic fermentation, whether it's done or not, right? So you're really tapping into your capabilities as a human, right? And I love that. And I love creating. I've always made things to a ridiculous level. Like, it's embarrassing. When I get really stressed, I just go make something, whether
You've been making a lot of stuff lately since COVID.
Yes. Yeah, we have a little school pod downstairs, and my job is to make muffins on Fridays as the superintendent of the pod. So I made muffins this morning. But Yeah, so I make things. But so I was in running a winery for 8 years, and then I started going down halfway through that stint, started going down to Argentina, and I was working the harvest in Argentina as well during their seasons. I started flying trout, my first winery in 2006, sold it in 2010, stayed on as the winemaker for about 4 more years, and then about 4 years ago, started Brook and Bull and Vital.
Right. Okay. So how did you come up with Brook and Bowl, the name for that?
Yeah, I think there are so few women in the wine industry that it is really important for us to get our name on there. And Flying Trout was the first winery that I started, and that is my last name. So the concept was I was flying between Argentina and Walla Walla, and my last name is Trout. And
Mhm.
because I had sold that winery, I didn't really want to step on their toes as far as naming something Trout all over again.
Because it's in
But
Walla
Brook
Walla
Trout,
as well.
what's that?
'Cause it was in Walla Walla as well, right?
Right,
Okay.
right. And brook trout and bull trout are two kinds of trout. So it's just sort of a fun, sneaky way to get it in there.
That's cool. I like that. And do you fish?
No, I'm the worst.
I was gonna say, like, if you're a big fisherman, that would be like even cooler. Yeah.
No,
Okay.
less cool.
Okay. Well, so you still have Brook and Bull Cellars, so you're still doing that, but you also mentioned that you have Vital Wines. So I think Vital Wines is super cool because it's a nonprofit winery that essentially all the money that you guys make from that goes towards the vineyard workers and providing them free healthcare, right?
Right, right. Well, attempting to, yeah.
Okay, okay. So what is the premise? Like how did the light bulb go off there to get you to realize, oh, I need to do this and I'm just gonna make it happen?
Yeah, the light bulb went off well before. I mean, the light bulb went off when I was a kid. It was well before I was ever in the wine industry. But I grew up in a um, bilingual, multicultural household, and my surrogate grandmother doesn't speak any English, and so my brother and I would do the translating in the doctor's office for her. And you can't blame everybody for trying and trying imperfectly and having imperfect results. It's just such a large problem, and that was apparent even as a 9-year-old. And so when you
You're
come into
translating as a 9-year-old for your grandmother at the doctor's office.
Well, it's not just me. I mean, you see that's extremely common within the immigrant community,
Wow.
any immigrant community, because a lot of times what happens is that middle generation is at work. Those 30 and 40-year-olds are at work
Right.
during the day. And so you have these sandwich generations relying on each other, right? These grandparents are taking care of the grandkids throughout the day. And then and that makes it even more poignant because these kids want to feel like they are taken care of, and they know that they are not being taken care of if they are the ones doing the translating, right? Or if they're the ones with sort of the burden on their shoulders to make today function.
Right.
And it's not the grandparents' fault by any means. And then furthermore, the grandparents are trying to be strong for these grandkids, and instead they're divulging what's going wrong with their embarrassing body parts, right? And so it's just a hot mess. And we are not, my family was not unique in that sense. It's very common.
Interesting, interesting. So then as a kid you saw the need for this, and then as you got to a point as an adult, you were like, hey, I can do this.
Well, I was firmly entrenched in the kind of industry where you've got huge swaths of people who are working within this industry and don't necessarily speak English fluently. And I know what's going on there. And it was very hard for me to ignore that. Having said that, at like 24, 25, I mean, there's only so much you can accomplish easily
Right.
with the roster of people you do or do not know, or the amount of financial stability you do or do not have access to. So it took me a second to sort of get there.
Right. So then how does Vital Wines work? Everything is donated or?
Yeah, it's been incredible. Pretty much everything is donated. Grapes, corks, capsules, labels, graphic design work, shipping supplies, you name it. And then we've done a few different things with the money. So historically, we've donated to a local free bilingual open door clinic called the SOS Clinic, or SOShealthservices.com is what the website is. They're amazing. That's where a lot of our funding has been going. And then this year during COVID, we launched a day-at-home program. So it was like an item you could purchase for $108. And the idea was, you've got so many people who are waiting for their test results, and they can't come work in the vineyard while they're waiting to hear back, and yet they're not covered necessarily to sit at home unpaid for those days, right? Or you've got a lot of people who don't own their own cars, and they were carpooling with other people who tested positive, and so now they can't get to work. I mean, a number of reasons why this kind of community is, I mean, you're seeing it coming out of it economically. You've got sort of this K economy of the, you know, the ones who are doing fine are doing better than ever, and the ones who aren't. And
Right.
so without any red tape, how do we cover that demographic that's struggling and doesn't have a lot of bandwidth to hit too many speed bumps in a row?
Right.
So that's that. And then recently what we've been trying to launch, and it's kind of a long game, but I think the right idea is sort of a community outreach member who is Hispanic, who is bilingual, who can go out and figure out within our communities, like, who needs more information, or who needs just 4% of help, so that then they know they're in that I'm getting help mode and they can launch, right? Who needs that nudge, and how do we get it to them? So that's kind of our next big fundraising goal, is how do we get this community outreach member? And then hopefully that rolls into all sorts of other stuff.
No, that sounds cool. I mean, that sounds like the next step for sure, is educating the people who need it. So that's awesome. Well, good. So if people want to help during the holidays, they can go online and buy Vital Wines, and you guys can ship, or is it just Walla
Yeah.
Walla? Okay, good.
Yeah, we can ship, absolutely. And we had a day at home donation button, and we're just in the process of switching that over to this community outreach person donation button. I'll come up with better words in a second. But yeah, I mean, we can't do a day at home anymore because the season is done,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
there's, you know, that ship has sailed. It was really important to do it when we were doing it, but now
Right.
it's done. So
What are some of the wines coming out of Vital Wines, and then also Brook and Bull Cellar? I know that you guys are doing, at least at Brook and Bull, the Petit Bordeaux, which I absolutely love, and Cab Franc and Malbec and Chardonnay. But you know, what are some of the other varietals that you guys are producing at both of the labels?
what's really fun about Vital is it's like Iron Chef for winemaking. So every donation season is different. And we make it even more different, because what happens is we turn down between 30 and 100 tons of donated fruit every year.
Wow.
And yeah, and so if you've, and some of these are the most expensive vineyards in the state. So if you've got really highly acclaimed vineyards trying to give you fruit for free, and you turn them down 2 or 3 years in a row, then they won't
Yeah.
do it again.
Yeah.
So you have to rotate. So not only do we have vintage variation, but we also have donation season variation.
Huh. So
And
why do you
so,
do you just have to turn them down because you just don't have the capacity to crush them and to keep everything?
you know, it's oddly, we've got access to all sorts of neutral donated barrels, and production is, you know, you pick a bigger tank or you pick a smaller tank, or you know, you get more barrels or you get fewer barrels. No matter what, it's 6 weeks and then you're done. So you're talking about 6 weeks that are 12-hour days, or 6 weeks that are 13-hour days. But either, you know, that part's not a big deal. What really gets us is, until recently, we didn't have an executive director for Vital. So it was all kind of bottlenecked on me, and at the time, the general manager for Brook and Bull. And we had actual day jobs that we needed to go do. And so if you've signed yourself up for a full-fledged large winery off to the side that nobody's getting paid to do, or, you know, I mean, when you're asking somebody to volunteer
Right.
30 hours a week, that's a beast. So that was the mitigating factor. But now that we have an executive director on board, I think we can really launch a bit better, and that's exciting.
That's great. That's awesome. There's an awesome college up in Walla Walla that focuses on wine production. And I assume you guys tap the students for Vital for that, or Vital taps the students at the college. Or maybe,
Yeah, I mean it's a small town, and so everything sort of gets mixed up all over the place. Sometimes the school will get donated some fruit and it doesn't fit into their, their profile, and they'll call us up and say, "Does Vital want this?" Because we don't have anywhere to stick it. Um, and we've had certainly lots of people both on the Brook and Bull side and the Vital side that have been out of the community college. So yeah, they're involved in everything really.
that's awesome. That's awesome. No, I had told my husband after we were up there, gosh, it feels like a million years ago, but it really wasn't. I was like, okay, we could live here because that was we traveled quite a bit, and there's been two places that we've been to where I'm like, okay, I could live here, and
Where's the other one?
um, it's in California, Carlsbad, California. So yeah, and he's still like leaning towards Carlsbad, but my kids are not really up for moving anywhere. But yeah, Walla Walla, I was like, oh, see, Jared, we could go here, we could move here, and we could both go to the college, the community college, and learn how to make wine. And so he was thinking about it.
There are a lot of people who've been moving to Walla Walla. I mean, right
Yeah.
now there's not a house to be found. Everybody showed up and bought a house.
Well, I'm sure even in the last like 8 months, people from Seattle have been like mass exodus of the city and get out there. So, well, good for real estate market, maybe. So, okay, so tell me what some of the varietals that you guys are making at Brook and Bull. We talked about Vital and being different every year, but what are you guys really specializing in at Brook and Bull?
Yeah, so I really, my love language for so long has been Malbec because of all those vintages I did in Argentina, and I was in Washington State um, during the growth of people figuring out Malbec in Washington State as well. And so I really love Malbec. We do a Malbec and a reserve Malbec as well. I love rosé. I kind of came late to rosé a little bit, and it's deceivingly hard to make. And so from a geek fest point of view, I like that challenge. And I would say the same thing about Cab Franc. I think Washington State can make beautiful Cab Franc,
Mm-hmm.
especially if you're a little bit edgy with it. And but then if you are edgy with it and you don't do it well, it's real terrible. So Cab Franc and Rosé are kind of my other favorites to dabble in. And then I really like showcasing what Cabernet can do when you pick it a little bit earlier and don't stick a bunch of oak on it. But like really high-end Cabernet, I feel like it's binary. I feel like you've got high-end cab that's very oaky and generally pick late, or you've got crappy cab that's all watered down and has neutral oak on it. And there's kind of nowhere in between. I mean, there is. I'm oversimplifying it, but that's where I really want to poke at.
And you don't have the whole rule that rosé is just for summertime, do you?
No, mm-mm.
I'm like, I drink it all year round.
Bubbles, rosé, all year round, both.
Perfect, perfect. And then from a Malbec standpoint, how do you like compare Washington Malbec to Argentinian Malbec? Like people are going to taste them side by side. What would they need to look for in say an Argentinian versus a Washington? Like what are the differences subtly that you would explain?
Yeah, oddly enough, there aren't that many differences. As far as drainage and soil type, they're similar. As far as temperature, they're similar. As far as wind, they're similar. A lot of the same clones are planted in both spots. They're very similar. The one big difference is altitude. So Mendoza, no matter where you are, and even more so when you're looking at Tupungato and some of these higher up places, it starts at 2,000 feet above sea level and goes up to 9,000
Right.
feet above sea level. And Washington State is much more just flatter and lower elevation. And so what you wind up with is the higher elevation you go, you get more red fruits, more cranberries, raspberries. It's just a redder profile, very crisp, long finish, bright, almost refreshing in a way, but you've still got, I hesitate to say refreshing with a red wine because that almost implicates like menthol and eucalyptus, and those aren't the notes you're going to get, but you're going to get just sort of this bright red pop. And it's going to have that tone throughout it. Whereas with a low valley floor Malbec, especially, you think about Washington State, where it is latitude wise, during our growing season, the sun rises at like 4:30 or
Wow.
5.
Yeah.
And there is no fog because we're in a rain shadow. The mountains catch all of that moisture. So we get straight blazing sunshine from like 4:30 to 9:30, or, you know, somewhere. It's a huge amount of sunshine. And so we can just cook those grapes if that's what we want to do. And Malbec responds really beautifully to that. It'll give you all these really neat, like marmalade, pie fruit, like cooked fruits, because
Right.
that's kind of what it is. And then black pepper, white pepper. You get some interesting pepper and leather notes, but it's a darker, deeper, sometimes burlier
Hmm.
wine.
Yeah, I always think it's fun to compare different regions side by side, the same varietal, and be able to taste, okay, here's Argentina, here's Washington, here's Colorado, and just be able to taste the subtle differences that you would see in a varietal like that. So thanks.
Right.
Okay, so I want to go back to women and you being a female winemaker. Um, so there's not a lot of you. So I mean, I think it's like 8% of there's like of all the winemakers in the US, it's 8% are female. And that's not a lot. That's what I mean, what are you seeing as, you know, a successful female winemaker? What are some of the challenges that you've seen in your industry, and have you seen it as a pro or a challenge being a female winemaker, or both?
Yeah, but both. I would say the highs are higher and the lows are lower. So you've got 900 wineries in the state of Washington. A lot of them are making great wine. It's not like 3 of them are making great wine and everybody else is making sludge. There's a lot of good wine out there. So how do you stand out? It's very hard to be a needle in the haystack, and or to, you know, just to shine, right? And if all you have to do is wake up in the morning female, that's pretty easy.
Yeah, yeah.
So, you know, I'll use that all day long. I have no shame. Let's do it. But the lows are there too. And I've been, I think, luckier than I ever knew in terms of who I entered into this industry with. So the guys out at Reininger, you know, we were family. I mean, you know, for years it was just me, Chuck, and Raul. And by noon, nobody had even uttered a word because we didn't have to. You know, it was just this beautiful ballet that was awesome, and just the best people. And so none of that was really, that's never been an issue. Same with the guys who bought Flying Trout, just wonderful people. That hasn't been the problem. I would say the biggest hurdle is just overcoming by small biases. So like I'll be now, not so much because I burnt out of the tasting room a little bit, but I would be behind the bar a lot, and people would come in and I would explain to them the name of the winery, and it was my name and it's my winery, and immediately people would say, "Oh my gosh, that's so amazing. Your family has a winery?" And I would say, "No, no, it's not my family's, just mine." And they would say, "Oh, that's awesome. You and your husband, you guys started a winery." And I'd say, "No, no, just mine." So little things like that. But then, you know, I think if you're graceful about it, you can just slowly change the numbers, you
Yeah.
know, slowly change the ratios and the biases that people have without picking a big fight. Our GM for a long time was a guy, and the barrel reps would come in with their, they'd cold call on us, and they'd come in with their packets, and they'd just hand them to Paul. And I'd be standing right there, and they had not done their homework, and they just assumed. And Paul had a good sense of humor about it. He'd be like, "Should I throw it in the trash?" And I'd be like, "Probably, but I'll take a look first." So I think a little grace goes a long way. And that's the kind of thing we run into. I think people, what I saw was people would buy like 2 bottles maybe.
Mm-hmm.
And then after we got all the accolades that we did, then they would, that turned into 6 and 12 bottle. And I'm sure that happens with every winery, but
Right. Right.
there's part of me that wonders whether it wasn't just because they were assuming that maybe it wasn't a
It
great
was going to be
winery.
so great. Yeah. Well, what would be some of your advice for women trying to get into the wine industry and specifically like into winemaking? What would you have for them starting out?
Yeah. I think the number one helpful, I know that the number one helpful thing in a winery is just looking around and seeing what you can do to help. Maybe it's exactly your job description, maybe it's not. It shouldn't matter, right? Like if it's especially a small winery, it's such a skill set to have somebody who can look down the hallway and see what's blocking the next move, right? And just fix it. Just go fix it. And that sometimes is a very physical, heavy thing to do. But there are pallet jacks, there are forklifts. I would say learn how to drive a forklift, and be comfortable climbing ladders and barrels, because if you can't be the brute force in the cellar, then maybe you can be the monkey, or maybe you can be the driver, and all of those things are helpful. And and then I would also just say, you can you can hear horror stories left and right, but it's kind of like the news, right? The news is always going to give you something more dramatic than what's actually going on in terms of the nitty gritty. And it's been a wonderful experience for me. Truly, I wouldn't trade it for the world. And I have to imagine that the majority of ladies feel the way I do, not the other way. And so,
That's not what
whatever
you're reading.
stories are out there, just go do it. Go do your own thing. Do it.
Okay. Yeah, it's not necessarily what you're reading in the New York Times about what's happening in the industry right now. So
I mean, that some of those exact ladies, I went to a seminar 2 years ago and heard them speak, and I was floored. Like, I had been in this industry for, I want to say 20 years by that point, or maybe 25 years. And this was never my journey. And so it shocked me as much as it would have shocked anybody else, because that's just not what I've experienced.
good. Well, good. So hopefully that's good insight for other women who are trying to get into it. It's not all like that. So that's good. So question about Walla Walla, because we have to bring it back to travel.
Sure.
So like I said, I love Walla Walla, and I have my own ideas as to what people should do when they come out there, when everyone can travel safely again and get back out there. But what are some of your top things that you would tell people to do if they come out to Walla Walla, or when they come out to Walla Walla?
Aside from eating and drinking?
Yes, yes. So clearly eating and drinking, they definitely have to get out to your winery and do the downtown, tasting rooms. But what are some of the other things that are, when your friends come to town, what do you say? Okay, here you have to do this.
It's a lot of eating and drinking. If we're being honest, it's a lot
Okay.
of eating and drinking.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, that's what we do here in this town, and we're good at it. That's kind of like saying, what would you do in Napa aside from wine drinking? Probably nothing. I would
Yeah,
probably go to Napa and just do a lot of wine drinking while I was
that's
there,
pretty much what I
especially
do.
especially if it's just 3 days. Like,
Yeah.
what would you do in Colorado? I'd go hiking
We're skiing. Okay.
or skiing.
Okay.
Yeah.
So just plan to eat and drink in Walla Walla.
Gosh, I think so. I mean, we've got some good hiking trails up by Mill Creek and Lake Bennington, especially if you're bringing your dog and you need a breath of fresh air. Maybe you did do too much drinking yesterday and you need to walk it off a little bit. So I would say those are definitely options. We've got some great breakfast places as well. And there's some cute little shops, little furniture stores, and downtown olive oil places and things like that. But yeah, overall, we've got some good yoga studios, stuff like that. But
Again,
overall, I
serve
would
off
say,
that wine. You go
I
to
mean,
the
it's all related.
walk around, go in, grab a coffee and a pastry, then walk down the yeah. There's some great little shops on that main street in downtown. I love it. It's so
Yeah,
cute.
yeah.
Cool. Well, then I have one more question for you, just because it's 2020 and it's not been the best year, but tell me what the vintage is looking like and how you guys were or were not impacted by the fires in California and Oregon.
Yeah, it's been a whirlwind of a year. So we were impacted. Um, it was pretty intense. Like I'm 5'3" and I couldn't breathe for a week, right? And so how these vines that are the exact same size as I am, we're going to get away scot-free was didn't seem realistic. And they didn't get away scot-free, but I will say I'm shocked and amazed at how easily we've skirted through this. We had 8 days of smoke, and what we learned was that if the smoke is far away enough, then you kind of get to that point where it doesn't smoke taint the wine so much or at
Okay.
all. So we had a lot of stuff test negative for smoke taint, and then the stuff that tested positive for smoke taint tested much lower than I would have thought.
Okay.
And so we turned that into rosé, because that long, very geeky story short, that will largely mitigate the smoke taint that you wind up with in your wine.
Yeah, because the juice is not on the skins for as long of a time, so that taint is going to be there. So you think 2020 is going to be the year of rosé for California and Oregon?
You're going to see a lot of rosé.
Yeah. Well, it's good. I like rosé, so that's good.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, well, good. Well, so then I just am so glad that I got to chat with you, and I will I can't wait to get back out to Walla Walla. So it is on my list for 2021. So when I do, I will make sure to reach out to you.
Please do. I would love to have you out here.
Perfect. I will. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Now hold on.